How does this get resolved? Because I want these cities to pay. I also, at the same time, don't want all the innocent people inside of the cities to pay.
Yeah, we don't have to speculate because we know how this turns out. It was David Dinkins did this in the late 80s, early 90s. You know, Jesse, most people forget that Rudy Giuliani lost the 1989 mayoral election to David Dinkins. 4 years later in 93, New York City elects an odd number of years. 4 years later in 93, Giuliani won by an unprecedented landslide because of things like this. Now, the only difference back then, and I had this conversation with a couple of our friends on text this morning, guys like Kurt Schlichter, we were talking about this exact thing. Back then, you had NYPD leadership that was willing to buck the system, go against the mayor's office, and shut down the unrest. There were a lot of riots in New York back in the late 80s. You had the Tompkins Square riots where the squatters started to demand they were given free housing and just took over buildings. You had Washington Heights riots, a false narrative over a police shooting. The FBI later determined the shooting was 100% justifiable. The bad guy had a gun. David Dinkins paid for that guy's funeral, a guy who tried to kill police. And he indicted the cops in the court of public opinion. The public finally got sick of it. The residents of the city of New York said enough with the crime, and we had 2 terms of Giuliani and 3 terms of Bloomberg. I have every problem in the world with Michael Bloomberg, but the one bit of credit you got to give him, he was a law and order guy. He let the NYPD do their job. So I think we know how the story ends, and I believe it ends, maybe not this cycle in 16, but it's going to end with massive voter backlash against these leftist politicians.
Is this worse than those previous times, John? I don't like to get so myopic. I pretend that everything happening today is the worst thing that's ever happened before. It's certainly the worst I've seen in my adult life. Is it the worst that you can remember?
Yeah, it is, I think. And I don't think it's hyperbole, and I don't think it's tunnel vision on your part. I agree with you here for the simple reason that this is a national Marxist movement. So when I talk about that unrest with David Dinkins back in the late 80s in New York City, there were localized issues, right? A police shooting. But that police shooting, the bad guy's name was Kiko Garcia, a known drug dealer. It was an anti-crime cop. The unit just disbanded by Dermot Shea, the police commissioner. But they didn't take hold nationally. It was isolated. It stayed in New York City. What we're seeing now, Black Lives Matter has nothing to do with Black Lives. We know that. It'll take 5 shows to explain why. Just on the crime data, it's a Marxist organization shielding itself behind a racial moniker, giving them cover to call us racists if we point out their Marxism, right? Antifa says, well, we're leaderless. We're not a real movement. We don't have a leader. Well, I don't buy that. That's all BS. Somebody's coordinating these people in multiple cities across a nation, across multiple nations at certain times to start their unrest at a certain time of day, all dressed alike, all using the same talking points. That's not a rudderless ship, a leaderless ship there. And so I think the difference, is that this has now become a global Marxism movement. We haven't really seen that before.
John, they talked about and have done eliminating the plainclothes NYPD, which you just brought up. Can you elaborate for a moment what plainclothes cops actually do? Because for most people, they don't have any idea. They don't get the concept of it.
No, it's a great question. I'm glad you asked it because a lot of people conflate and confuse undercover with plain clothes. 2 different things, right? An undercover is you and I are detectives or agents, Jesse. We want to go catch some cartel guys. We play the roles of drug dealers or dirty bankers or money launderers. That's not what a plain clothes unit is. A plain clothes unit is merely cops dressed like you and I are now in unmarked vehicles who are patrolling. They're still on the radio. They can still respond to calls. That's something an undercover would never do, right? An undercover works overtime to never be outed as a cop or an agent. The plainclothes units are out there. They have lights in their cars and sirens. They're just unmarked vehicles, and they are tremendously effective at stopping robberies. That's really what their mission is. This nonsense about they harass people of color. Now, their mission, I worked in one of those units. It's to stop robberies. You deploy yourself and your teams in high traffic areas, retail areas, or outside of subway stations where commuters are coming home at night and it's dark. And you essentially are very proactive looking to interdict and stop armed robberies, rapes, assaults, things of that nature. It'll have disastrous consequences disbanding these units. They are highly, highly effective and have very few complaints. There was no reason, there was no data to substantiate the disbanding of these units.
Hey, thanks so much for watching The First on YouTube. If you liked what you saw, go ahead and like and subscribe. You heard me. Like it, subscribe. You'll get a lot more of it and a lot more of me.